Welcome, everyone. Today, we're unpacking one of the most complex, deeply rooted conflicts in modern history. We're going to neutrally trace 124 years of Arab-Israeli relations right from 1896 all the way to 2020. This is a century of strife fundamentally centered on three massive overlapping concepts: land, national identity, and statehood. Instead of getting bogged down in the endless daily headlines, let's step back. We're going to rely strictly on the historical record to see exactly how we got here, examining the pivotal decisions, the devastating wars, and the elusive treaties that forged the modern Middle East.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to follow a clear, chronological roadmap today. We'll start with origins and early tensions, move into 1948 and the First War, explore the decades of escalation, track the pursuit of peace, and finally analyze the lasting impact of the conflict.
So, let's begin with Section 1. Origins and Early Tensions, covering the pivotal period from 1896 to 1945.
And this brilliantly illustrates the roots of the history. We really have to look at the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This was a time when the Ottoman Empire was slowly fracturing, basically creating a massive political vacuum in the Middle East. The historical record shows us the core ideological drivers that rushed in to fill that void. Simultaneously, you had the rise of Zionism and the surge of Arab nationalism. We aren't just talking about abstract political theories here, right? We're talking about two deeply passionate, foundational movements mobilizing at the exact same time for the exact same territory. Early Zionist thinkers were seeking a safe haven and self-determination for Jewish people in their ancestral homeland amid rising and, frankly, deadly European anti-Semitism. Concurrently, Arab nationalist leaders were cultivating a unified Arab identity, aiming to shake off centuries of Ottoman rule and secure independent statehood across the Levant. The friction wasn't just ideological. It was an inevitable collision course of demographics, aspirations, and survival.
Now, the situation before 1945 was thrown into overdrive by the intervention of global empires during and after World War I. The British government effectively began promising the same territory to different groups. It's like a giant, messy puzzle. You had the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret treaty carving up the Middle East between Britain and France, which directly contradicted promises of independence made to Arab leaders. Then came the Balfour Declaration, pledging British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. When the League of Nations formally established the British mandate for Palestine, while these contradictory promises became explosive. British policies initially facilitated increased Jewish immigration and land purchases, and that dramatically shifted the economic and social realities on the ground. Arab tenant farmers often found themselves displaced, while political anxieties over demographic shifts just soared. This tension finally reached a boiling point in the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939, a massive grassroots uprising against British administration and Jewish immigration that fundamentally hardened the dividing lines between the two communities.
That brings us to Section 2, 1948, a defining climax in the historical record known as the First War.
The formal outbreak of war in 1948 didn't just happen overnight. The trauma and unimaginable devastation of the Holocaust during World War II profoundly accelerated international support for a sovereign Jewish state. The British, who were unable to manage the escalating intercommunal violence and financially exhausted from the global war, basically handed the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. This resulted in the 1947 UN Partition Plan, Resolution 181, which proposed dividing the land into independent Arab and Jewish states, with a special international regime for Jerusalem. And here is the crucial pivot. Jewish leadership accepted the partition, seeing it as the realization of the Zionist dream. Arab leadership, however, unequivocally rejected it, viewing it as an unjust colonial imposition that severed their homeland. The exact moment the British mandate expired and the State of Israel was formally declared, this diplomatic impasse immediately ignited a full-scale, multi-front war.
So, who were the main players? The strategic realities for the key actors in 1948 were incredibly fraught. On one side, you have David Ben-Gurion, Israel's primary founding father and first prime minister. He made the monumental decision to declare statehood, knowing full well the new nation would immediately face an invasion by surrounding, heavily armed forces. He had to rapidly consolidate disparate paramilitary groups into a unified national defense force under immense existential pressure. On the other side was the Arab League, a coalition including Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, Iraq, and Lebanon. While they were absolutely unified in their fundamental opposition to Israel's creation and their goal to secure an Arab Palestine, the coalition was severely hampered by internal rivalries, uncoordinated military command, and competing political ambitions among its leaders. These differing levels of structural cohesion played a massive role in the trajectory and ultimate outcome of the war.
This takes us into Section 3, decades of escalation, spanning the vast era from 1948 all the way to 2020.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the decades. The post-1948 era was defined by rapid, relentless military engagements that continually redrew the map of the Middle East. The 1956 Suez Crisis reshuffled Cold War alliances for sure, but it was really the 1967 Six-Day War that fundamentally altered reality. In less than a week, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This wasn't just a military victory. It created the incredibly complex territorial reality we're still grappling with today. Then, the 1973 Yom Kippur War flipped the script again. Launched with a surprise attack by Egypt and Syria, it shattered the perceived invincibility of the Israeli military. Although Israel eventually repelled the assault, the heavy psychological and material toll actually paved the way for the unthinkable: eventual diplomatic negotiations between Israel and Egypt.
But conventional warfare between nations was really only half the story. The escalation rapidly shifted from traditional battlefields to a complex web of internal, asymmetric resistance. Following the loss of Arab territories in 1967, Palestinian nationalism found its vanguard in the creation of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, which utilized guerrilla tactics to fight for a Palestinian state. As the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza continued, frustration erupted into the First and Second Intifada. These were massive, localized popular uprisings that brought the conflict right into city streets and daily life. Concurrently, we saw the rise of Hamas, a militant group presenting a formidable, religiously driven alternative to the secular PLO. On the other side of the equation, Israeli policies consistently drove escalation too, particularly through the establishment and rapid expansion of civilian settlements in the West Bank. These settlements fundamentally changed the facts on the ground, slicing through contested territories and immensely complicating any potential geographic reality for a future two-state solution.
The strife also possessed a dangerous regional gravity, routinely spilling across borders and pulling neighboring states into the vortex. The Lebanese Civil War is a staggering example of this proxy dynamic. What started as an internal Lebanese conflict became a massive theater for the broader Arab-Israeli struggle. Israel launched a large-scale invasion into Lebanon in 1982 specifically to root out PLO forces operating there. However, this military intervention created a severe power vacuum in southern Lebanon. In response to the Israeli occupation, and with significant funding and ideological backing from the newly established Islamic Republic of Iran alongside Syrian influence, a new militant group was birthed, Hezbollah. This vividly showcases the intense cause and effect nature of the region. A tactical military decision in one decade literally spawns a formidable geopolitical adversary for the next.
Let's shift our focus to Section 4, the pursuit of peace, examining the diplomatic efforts attempting to resolve these decades of conflict.
Now, what's really interesting about this diplomatic falling action is the incredible arc of hope and profound disappointment. Despite the intense militarization, there were monumental efforts to negotiate settlements. The breakthrough came with the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, a landmark agreement where Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for full diplomatic recognition. This fundamentally removed the largest Arab army from the conflict. Fast forward, and we get the ambitious Oslo Accords in the 1990s, which for the first time established mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO, creating the Palestinian Authority and sparking genuine hope for a two-state solution. However, that hope structurally collapsed following the failed high-stakes Camp David summit in 2000. The leaders simply could not agree on the absolute hardest issues: the status of Jerusalem, permanent borders, and the right of return for refugees. Subsequent efforts, like the broader Arab Peace Initiative, have remained on the table, but the diplomatic engine is largely stalled, leaving a dangerous political vacuum.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Impact of the Conflict. When you have 124 years of ongoing tension, unresolved borders, and frequent warfare, the structural ripple effects are devastating. The conflict has essentially locked multiple nations in a state of enduring political instability. Economically, the disruption is staggering. Decades of heavy military spending have severely stunted domestic economic growth and regional integration. We're talking about populations living under blockades or in states of perpetual wartime readiness, choking off foreign investment and long-term infrastructure development. Crucially, it spurred mass, multi-generational migration. Millions of Palestinians remain displaced, with families having lived in refugee camps across Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria for generations. This isn't just a historical footnote, folks. It is a permanent reshaping of the demographic and geographic reality of the entire Middle East.
Stepping past the geopolitics for a second, we absolutely must acknowledge the day-to-day human toll.
A century of strife dictates the daily reality of millions. Protracted conflict systematically dismantles civil society, and it has marginalized communities and women who frequently bear the heaviest burdens of this collapse. We're looking at fractured education systems, decimated healthcare infrastructure, and local economies where basic survival supersedes growth. Consider the profound psychological weight of restricted movement, economic embargoes, and the constant looming threat of violence. These aren't just abstract political concepts. They're daily realities that shape childhoods, limit opportunities, and deeply entrench cycles of trauma that pass directly from one generation to the next.
So, the crucial point is this. We've tracked a century of dual nationalisms, devastating wars, popular uprisings, and fractured peace treaties. We're left with a deeply rooted, highly complex reality, where the past actively dictates the present. We've relied entirely on the historical data in this explainer to trace the overlapping claims to land, identity, and statehood that forged this strife. The question we must ask ourselves moving forward is, how does a century of strife shape the future of these communities, and can sustainable stability ever be built on such fractured foundations? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.